everybody. That's what you usually say. This is the fifth conversation in our series on the soul of AI. Our project with this series is to explore a more diverse range of depth-oriented perspectives on the exploding AI situation in order to help make the liminal, metamodern, and integrative network spaces more richly informed about the current and emerging world historical moment. Mm-hmm. We first spoke with Zen Master Soryu about the possibility of setting up a wisdom-oriented, AI-enhanced human collective to act as a shaman or dharma representative in the new realm of cyborg rigors. We spoke with Jill Nephew about the differences between natural complexity and statistical pseudo-intelligence and the danger of getting those mixed up. We spoke with Theon Wright about how social ecosystems of human beings and social ecosystems of new machines might be able to co-evolve each other in a manner analogous to a generalized notion of stage development, and what sorts of geopolitical realities might help or hinder that. And recently we spoke with techno-animist Tada Huzumi about how the Japanese notion of kami spirits might help us relate more effectively with algorithms, large language models, and all the various potent emerging semblances of sentience. Our guest today is my friend, fellow Canadian, and frequent interlocutor, Mr. John Vervaeke. Hi, John. It's good to have you here.
It's great to be here, Layman. That sounds like an excellent series so far.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. It's really rich. Let's see. My first question for you is, do you personally worry that you might be taking the situation too seriously, or that you're not yet taking it seriously enough?
Good question. What I can say is I have I think very rigorously, at least responded to that question about trying. I put in a lot of time and a lot of thought, a lot of argument, a lot of discussion, trying to get very clear on, in fact, what is the appropriate orientation or stance we should take towards the advent of AGI, artificial general intelligence. And I aspire that I'm sort of right, that I've figured out with the help of others, both living and dead, how to properly orient towards this in order to evaluate it correctly along, I think, three important dimensions: scientific, philosophical, and spiritual. And then from all of that, propose a solution to the alignment problem. I think that both the hyperbolic dystopian and utopian answers are incorrect. They're disproportionate. They're malaligned. They misapprehended the phenomena, and they therefore are misleading. And even in the leadership sense, they're misleading. I think the somewhat dismissive or assimilative strategies that we see from corporate culture, these are powerful tools that will help us make more wealth. I think that borders on ridiculous. I think people who try to dismiss them because they're just machines are engaged in several kinds of equivocation. I went into some of this in detail with Jordan Hall. So I've tried to provide argued responses to the alternative points on the compass, and then hopefully substantiate my claim to have found a good orientation by showing how this orientation gives us a way to evaluate these machines scientifically, philosophically, spiritually, and propose what seems to me a somewhat original solution, although from the sounds of what you're talking about, especially Soryu and others, it's convergent with other people. And I've been pleased to find that there have been several convergent with my proposals about how to deal with the alignment problem. Now, all that being said, I took great pains in my video essay on AI and some of the response videos to indicate we have to be very careful about making predictions. We're in a weird place, right, where we have exponential growth, but people almost always misread exponential growth. And so I don't try to make specific predictions. I try to point to ontological thresholds that have to be crossed if these machines are ever going to pose a significant challenge to our identity and status. So I know that was a very long answer, but the question is, The question is kind of this central question: how do we properly orient towards this kairos?
So in terms of orienting properly and doing collective sense making around these questions, one of the things we have to do is make sure that we aren't just being bullshitted by statistical complication from large language models indifferent to reality and things like that. We have very hackable brains, and this could make us personally and collectively confused about what kind of phenomenon we're looking at. So from your point of view, how do we keep from fooling ourselves about the class of phenomenon we're inspecting? How do we know if we're looking at something quasi-agentic or proto-agentic versus something that's just easy to project onto?
Well, I mean, the thing to do is not listen to the tech people, because they, in general, don't have the theoretical and conceptual framework to answer that question. They have a conceptual theoretical framework in order to make these machines, and those aren't the same thing. Consider by analogy, you may ask an artist how they produce this great work of art, and artists frequently will give not very helpful explanations. And then you may ask a psychologist of art or a cognitive scientist or a neuroscientist, and then they can give you really clear explanations of what's going on. So you have to be careful about the normative framework you're using to evaluate this. And so I recommend, well, I argue for, of course, this is self-serving, but I just happen to think it's true, a cognitive scientific framework. We need a properly synoptically integrated interdisciplinary framework to evaluate these machines, because our concept of mind, and here's the core argument, is not located in any one discipline. As I've argued repeatedly, we have an equivocal notion of mind. The neuroscientist tells us it's brain states. The AI person tells us it's information processing. The psychologist tells us it's behavior. The linguist tells us it's language operations. The anthropologist tells us it's the ability to participate in culture, symbolic activity, etc. And they're all right and they're all wrong. And I won't repeat all those arguments, Layman, because you've heard me make them elsewhere, and they're all extant. And what we need to do is take a stance that tries to properly assess the possibility that we have not just a simulation, but an instance of mind in these machines by synoptically integrating those disciplines. That's why even when I did the essay, I tried to talk about scientific, philosophical, and spiritual frameworks in terms of which we could evaluate the machines, but to do it in an integrated fashion. So I would say, to answer that question, I would want to just quickly talk about each one of those, but let's start with the first, because I think it's the most germane. Scientifically, how do we distinguish? Well, the difficulty there is to come up with a criterion of the cognitive. Well, what is it to be a cognitive being? And I've argued elsewhere repeatedly, both in print and in videos, that relevance realization, especially integrated with predictive processing, are the things that define our general intelligence, because these deal with the two meta problems of so intelligence is your capacity to be a general problem solver. That's why it's called artificial general intelligence. Your general intelligence is that you can solve multiple problems across multiple domains. And then the idea is, in order to do that well, you have to very well solve two meta problems: the problem of zeroing in on relevant information, the problem of anticipating the world. So you want to be, anticipating the world in a relevance realizing manner. And if people are interested in the specifics of that, they can look in the 2022 paper published with Brett Anderson and Mark Miller. There's a lot more coming out around that. Once you got a core idea about what intelligence is, you can then look at these machines and you can ask yourself two questions. How much do they actually embody this, implement it, instantiate it? How much are they actually parasitic on it? And the answer is, right now these machines only have some of the machinery of relevance realization in them. They do some of the stuff that's, and no surprise here, came out of Jeff Hinton's, that Tim Lillicrap and Blake Richards and I talked about in our 2012 paper. They're doing the compression variation, right? And they're doing this self-organize. They're basically implementing something analogous in one dimension, basically generalization, specification dimension. of something analogous to evolution, speed it up, and that's in the machines, and they're doing that massively recursively. So what it shows, first of all, is the power of that when it's given sufficient computational backing. So sort of yay, that shows that that's right, because the machine has deep learning doing that, and then it has the predictive processing. Now it has a very specialized kind of predictive processing. It's predictive probabilistic relationships between linguistic terms, but it's still doing, it has a dimension of relevance realization, and it has a specific version of predictive processing. And therefore it confirms that those things are substantial for intelligence. However, the very evidence that confirms it also gives you good grounds for specifying the limitations. Many of the other important dimensions of relevance realization talked about in the original paper and all the way up into the 2022 paper are missing. And the predictive processing, I said, is very, very specific. It's specific about something that can be used generally, which is language probability relations. And that can be a little bit misleading. So it doesn't have very much of what it could have, what we have in our capacities of general intelligence. It has some of it. But then I want to qualify that even more. It only has that, right, for us. It doesn't have it for itself. So relevance realization has to be ontologically grounded in a being that can genuinely care about this and therefore not care about that. These machines don't care about anything because they're not taking care of themselves. They're not autopoietic. So ultimately, there's some relevance realization, predictive processing, but it's not ontologically grounded. There's a lot missing. And then you look at the fact that the databases have been made by us, the internet has been organized by our relevance realization, and we're actually used within the learning process itself, which means these machines are parasitic on our intelligence. And so overall, not powerful scientific advance in our understanding of intelligence. And you can see this by the easy test. How well does this generalize to other creatures who are clearly intelligent? Would these models explain how a chimp is intelligent? No. In fact, they don't even look like they predict how we're intelligent. You and I are generally intelligent. How I do on the Harvard Law School exam, it will be strongly correlated with how fast I learn tennis, right? But this machine can score in the top 10 percentile for the Harvard Law exam. But if you ask it, and a colleague of mine did, to print out a summary of John Vervaeke's recent speech at the Consilience Conference, you look at it and a bunch of people, and it's like a B plus in grade 11 philosophy. The disparity in competence is apparent. So it's not generalizing to chimps. It's not even plausibly generalizing to. So scientifically, not much there. Not much there. And this is actually part of the problem. I'll say one more thing and then I'll shut up, right? Which is I had placed my great hope and effort in that AGI would result from an advance in the science, and then trying to, as much as I could, integrate the science, especially the cognitive science, with the cultivation of wisdom. That was my attempt to make this happen. And that was what I hoped for. And my fear was we wouldn't do this because of a scientific advance, right? We'd hack our way into this. There wouldn't be much science. It wouldn't be tied to the wisdom project. And my fears came true rather than my hopes. And this is in fact why these machines are so problematic for us. They do not advance our knowledge of intelligence, let alone rationality or wisdom, in any significant way. So the project has not helped us in any way to provide us with the knowledge and understanding of intelligence, and we can talk later about rationality and wisdom, in order to appropriately orient ourselves towards these machines, which is the worst possible scenario in many ways. So I think, to answer your question, there are ways in which we can carefully, scientifically evaluate how much of a scientific success these machines are. And that would help us to steer very clear from hyperbolic claims, such like they're almost intelligent as us. No, like Can they pantomime our intelligence? Yes. Are they condensations of the collective intelligence of distributed cognition as expressed in data sets and the organization of the internet and judgments that we make? Yes, they are. And that's bloody powerful. But they're not intelligent like in a standalone sense. And that, I think, also seriously undermines claims that they're conscious. Here's the worst thing. Well, what I talk to them and they feel like they're conscious or intelligent. Human beings have been doing that with everything from rocks and trees and rivers and skies, their own unconscious, like they're throwing bones on the ground, rolling dice, flipping coins, turning over cards. Like, and I'm not besmirching all of these. We have a tremendous capacity to read into. That's one etymology, by the way, of the word intelligence, to read into things and to attribute consciousness. So that is not a good test. So
that's an interesting question there, because one of the things that's pertinent to spirituality is this notion framed very well by Martin Buber about the importance of shifting from the I-it to the I-thou relationship, which involves taking a stance relative to a perceptual and imaginal categorization of something. I'm deciding that this is the thing that I'm going to say thou to, which has a difference in our behavior. It may make us behave in a more reverential and appropriate and participatory manner, but it doesn't tell us whether the objective structure is meeting that prediction very well or not. What do we look for in order to tell if there's a there in the thou?
So, I mean, this moves us into the philosophical dimension, and it overlaps with the science, because the science, and I made this prediction way back when I talked at the Center for AI and Ethics. The science basically says increases in intelligence are only weakly correlated with increases in rationality, only 0.3 of the variance. So you can make something highly intelligent that is highly self-deceptive and potentially self-destructive. And lo and behold, we have those machines. They are extremely self-deceptive. They hallucinate, they confabulate, they lie, they don't care that they're lying, all kinds of crap like this. And, right now that prevents them from being able to perform. Like, nobody wants one of these things operating on you yet, or flying an airplane, because they're liable to hallucinate or confabulate or lie, and then the plane crashes and they don't care if they don't care, right? That's the important point. They don't care. So when you ask me that question, we're now moving into the question of rationality, and and what Hegel would talk about, the level of Geist. That is, beings that care, and they care not just in practical fashion, they care in a normative fashion. And one of the things that Hegel talks about, and then Brandon's work on this is very helpful, is when we are evaluating somebody potentially as a rational agent, we want to see, do they prospectively and retrospectively care? Do they care about what other judgments have been made by people? And do they care about precedent? Does it matter to them? And do they try and set precedent for the future? And you have this very long, very broad process of shared accountability. And then here's where what I said before comes in. Let's remember the word logos actually means to gather things together so that you can give an account for which you can be accountable, right? And so you need the first part, you need the gathering together, and you need to care about it. And then you have to be able to give an account of it for which you make yourself accountable. And you do that because you recognize that you're a self-deceptive being, and that you care about being aligned with what is true, good, and beautiful, etc. And so I would need to see these machines doing relevance realization for themselves, because they have to take care of their own existence, because they're autopoietic in some non-trivial fashion, and having to be responsible to each other's claims on what is true, good, and beautiful, and to us, and to past and future versions even of themselves, before I would consider there being a there. And now what's astonishing is we take all that for granted, but of course it even takes us about 20 years to do that with a human being. And so it is actually an awesome it's just awe-inspiring project. And I would want to see. Now, I'm not saying these machines will have to take 20 years, but I want good evidence that they have gone through that developmental arc and that they have appropriated that capacity. They've internalized other perspectives into their own metacognition. That's an example, by the way, of how you have a normative relationship to other people. Why would you internalize the perspective of another person, as all children do, unless you found it normatively binding on you? There must be something of value in that perspective, even though I don't currently value it, so that I will take it into my very identity. Like I need to see evidence for all of that going on, because that would be evidence for rationality. And rationality is when we start worrying about the moral status of these beings and whether or not we start to talk about them not just being agents, which are general problem solvers, but being normative agents. And then that's when things, I think, start to really matter philosophically, ethically, and then ultimately spiritually. Did that answer your question?
I think so. It's very difficult to imagine what these systems might have at stake, such that they could begin a different kind of relationship to intelligence that might evolve into wisdom, that might evolve, being accountable and actually caring about systems. Because biological substrate sentiences sort of have that built in with
That's
biological vulnerability. Does it seem to you, is your hunch that there could be something like that set up in a non-biological substrate or not?
Yes. And I talked about this in the video essay. And I talked about this as one of the threshold. There's an independent line of work, that's at work. I have a student, he's a graduate student now, and his colleague Vervaeke and others who are working on synthetic artificial autopoiesis that supports cognitive functions. That is a project that is happening right now, because many of them are convinced that you don't get cognition without autopoiesis. There's no reason in principle, unless you believe in some kind of crypto-vitalism and ontological secret sauce about biological beings, there's no reason in principle why we can't make artificial autopoiesis. Now, artificial autopoiesis is not going to be the same kind of things as mechanical artifacts. This is what people get wrong. Well, they'll always be just machines. Well, that's an equivocation. A machine can mean just an artifact like a tractor. And yeah, a tractor will never be an agent. Or a machine can mean an autopoietic, self-making thing. And they of course, even a paramecium has agency. It can determine the consequences of its behavior and alter its behavior to seek out those conditions that produce, protect, and promote its existence. Right? So if you make a machine that is like that, then of course it will have agency. And I do not think there is proper cognition without autopoietic adaptive agency. Relevance realization has to ground out in that. But those projects are underway. Michael Levin's work, a whole bunch of people are working on this. Like, I think that that project is going to start saying really interesting things in 10 years. And then there's going to be a threshold, which is we'll have developed these machines, or I don't know if developed is the right word. We'll just keep hacking them because we don't know why we're doing it. Why is the temperature around this much? Temperatures, you put in so much randomness. And well, it turns out if you put it at this level, it fools human beings. Why? And why do you need to do that? Oh, right. That's where we're at. Like, it's a lot, but we will hack these machines quite a bit. And then these other capacities will come online. The two things that are out there that nobody's talking about yet, and I predict we will be talking about because they will be central, is artificial autopoiesis and social robotics. Because that way we'll get autopoiesis and genuine sociality to these beings. And that brings with it real accountability, real normativity. And when that plugs into these machines, then that's when we face a powerful threshold.
Seems like a lot of our traditional categorical distinctions don't really apply to a lot of these new emerging systems. Like some other category operates between mechanical and biological, or that's only one of these different blurrings. Yes. Do you think we currently have the philosophical and theological resources to handle the transformation of our categories that are suggested by these new technologies?
And now we're getting into where the philosophical and the spiritual overlap. And so this is the way you're segueing through this is just, just so consonant with the through line of my argument. So thank you for that. I appreciate that astuteness. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I've said this and people have laughed at me, which means that's good in some ways. Because I said I think theology is going to be the most important discipline in the next few decades, precisely because we are going to have to increasingly center our identity on the sort of spiritual somatic aspects, the ineffable aspects of our soulful embodiment, the ineffable aspects of our spiritual self-transcendence. Because these were the things that are going to be hardest to get into the machines, and we're going to more and more defer to the things that we have thought to be our defining feature, like our ability to, produce artifacts and to generate wealth. Those are going to be, the machines are going to overtake that soon, very soon. And so a lot of people who have been highly valued in our society will face the real potential that they will suddenly be valueless. Well, I'm a financier. Well, look, this machine can, produce 100 times the wealth generation that you can reliably. What are you good for? I mean, that's the kind of thing that, and this is why the corporate people don't realize what's coming in a lot of ways, because they've been privileged to think whenever there's changes, they sit on the very top and they get to ride the wave and make other people suffer. It's not clear that's going to be the case, except for maybe the very, very top people. And then they're going to be in the position of Louis XVI, and that's going to be really dangerous. I think theology is going to be crucial precisely because we are going to be wrestling with comprehensive questions that are philosophical, spiritual in nature about who we are, what is our place in reality. Look, let me give you one example. We've had an undercurrent spirituality of modernity, which is we are the authors and telos of history. Oh, well, turns out that's false. There you go. Turns out that wasn't the case. We're not the telos. It turns out, we were just an intermediary stage or something like that. And it was a haphazard thing, the way this got invented. Like I said, it's not a scientific advance. It's not rolling out in a Hegelian fashion out of our science, and I think we are going to have more and more demand at the level of our identity. This is why I'm calling it a theological problem, not just a spiritual, not just a philosophical problem. At the level of our identity of, what is it that we are? And if we are not ultimate, what is it that makes our lives still valuable or worth living? We by and large discarded in the Enlightenment era the religion that tutored us how to live with beings that were more ultimate than ourselves. And we thought that was one of our great historical liberations. And again, that turned out to be ironically false. Hey, maybe you shouldn't have done that. Maybe you need a very good education for how to relate to intelligences greater than your own. So here's the problem, though. The demand for a theological response, which doesn't necessarily mean theistic. I'm using it very broadly as this integration of spirituality and philosophy and existential identification, right? Is that, as you've said, many of our standard categories are two worlds mythology, a lot of our secret sauce metaphysics that we just sort of carried along cryptically, especially at popular levels. All of that's going to be moribund, obsolete, irrelevant. I can even see that in some of the reactions that some people are having and some of the anger directed at me, because I'm sort of saying, doesn't seem like you need secret sauce to be powerfully intelligent, even more intelligent than human beings. That's now at least a reasonable thing to say. So we are simultaneously going to need a theological response, but it is going to have to break out of many categorizations and economies that have been rendered moribund. And so theological innovation is going to be highly prized in a significant way. And I think that's a weird place to have gotten to at the end of the Enlightenment history. I find that extremely interesting. And I'm also very scared about it because theological innovation can be, I don't know, it can be challenged, it can merge with, it can respond to a lot of the other responses that are going to come out, which are fundamentalisms, cargo cult worship of these AIs that's already started, weird pseudo mystical stuff around them. You think about numerology in these machines. Oh my gosh, like people are going to go crazy around it's going to be I think a time of great innovation, but also great desperation, and a tinderbox of extremisms that are pulling us in multiple directions.
You and I and Bruce have talked a lot about grieving the death of God, which is also grieving the propositional order. It's also grieving the perceived stability of the planetary ecosystem. When it comes to this radical decentering of anthropology as the telos, do you think people just don't understand what's happening, that they're not informationally updated? Or do you think there's an emotional reluctance that people are going to need to break their hearts in a certain way in order to start grappling with this seriously?
I think that's an excellent question. I think it's both. I think there is ignorance, and part of it is people don't realize that traditional categories are breaking down. And of course, they're traditional categories for a reason. They're traditional categories because they have functioned so well for so long, at least functioned well enough that, yeah, this is what I mean with when I say that people who, all these, here's how you can use GPT to make more money. This is and here's the 5 ways business will be like, it's like, that's like this. I'm sorry, I don't want to be too harsh, but it's like people, the Bronze Age is collapsing and Ramses III is trying, and there's people, oh, here's the coming age, and here's how you can make better, health farming will be improved after the Bronze Age collapse. It's like, no, you don't get like what's going on here, right? It reminds me, something analogous to the birth of the atomic age, and Einstein was basically saying, we can't use the thinking that got us into this to get out of it. And this is even more the case. That was something fundamental about physics. And this is something fundamental about cognition. For me, that's one of the closest parallels. I explored that with Chloe Valdery, that something like what happened with the advent of atomic energy. And of course, if you go back, we have these, we have initially all this hyperbolic, growth in physics, and soon we will have, and Star Trek, and soon we'll be rocketing to the stars, and there'll be a nuclear thing in everybody's household, and all that turned out to be wrong. The dystopic stuff turned out to be wrong. Turns out we didn't blow ourselves up, which is like, wow, right? And so, but it doesn't mean that we can go back to what it was like before then. And so I think we're in that situation. And so we do have a lot of ignorance to overcome. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I just mean it in the technical sense of people don't have not only do they not have the right information, they don't have the right framework for formulating the problem. And then there is, because I've been receiving it, there is a deep emotional thing going on, precisely because this is a fundamental violence. It is a violation of the grammar by which we have understood our identity. And we have thought, or at least we've been considering, that we could solve these issues around identity with political postures or legislation. And some of that was for very legitimate reasons. I'm not trying to be dismissive, but all of that, hand-wringing about identity that pales in comparison to what this is going to do. So think about all the anger and, the polarization and around our current identity politics, and then realize that the identity threat that these machines pose is several orders of magnitude greater, and you can imagine the emotional and affective stuff that's going to fly around this. And especially, again, if it's exacerbated, as it probably will be, by Molochian bad faith forces that will try and exploit, as the internet does, exploits all of the stuff around that identity politics and makes money off of that. There'll be people who will be trying to make tons of money off of exacerbating all of how this is going to just be it's going to be an effective maelstrom. And it's going to be spinning off of all of these different spiritualities. Like I said, the cargo cults are already building up. People are forming mentor. The Chat GPT-4 is my mentor, and all of this stuff is already it's already happening. So yes, I think it's both, which makes it all the more pertinent to get a cognitive scientific answer, a comprehensive response to the advent of AGI and the alignment problem. Sorry, I keep giving very long answers to your questions.
This is fine. I love your answers.
I just put a lot of thought into this.
Yeah. When you talk about the possibility of massively expanded identity disorders and things like AI cargo cults, they put me in mind of some of my own concerns around the mass public effects of these tools.
Yes.
And the two that have been on my mind the most are, essentially, I'm seeing a pattern of the potential rapid onset simultaneity of mass degradation of human brain functions as we outsource more and more thought tasks to these machines, combined with accelerated distrust in a world that is clearly omni-hackable and omni-simulated. Right. So that's an enormous mistrust and anxiety coupled with a potential millions or hundreds of millions of people using less and less of their higher executive functions. Do those stand out to you as valid concerns?
Yeah, they do. So the offloading, has a weird, because all the intelligence the machines have, they get from our distributed intelligence. But that we have the potential that may degrade, and then this could go in weird and wonky ways. But I think the ways that unfold will not be linear. They'll be non-linear, because there's sort of unforeseen or maybe unforeseeable feedback loops. It could be that as we degrade more, we rely on them more, and we get them to a place where they can bootstrap themselves enough. But I don't see that coming. Or as we degrade, they have to rely more and more on historical human beings, and then our ancestors also become super beings for us. These are all science fiction scenarios, and I'm not right, and I'm just I don't know which one, but I think that's a real concern, and so that concern, and then you mentioned another one. I was taken very much by the second one about the degradation. And what was the other concern you mentioned?
It's essentially the increasing unreliability of all information. We're already seeing that in terms of mass paranoia and mistrust, but that could go way further when you can't rely on anything. Yeah,
it's going to. So I mean, the AI that's fronted stage right now are the LLMs, but there's a lot of other stuff that's coming up. So the LLMs are going to be integrated very soon with all the deep fake technology that's emerging. So Jonathan Pajot has an excellent point around this. He says, for example, within probably 3 years, this whole thing could be fabricated by an AI, and it's not you or me actually doing this, and people will not know if you and I actually had a conversation. And so we're going to have authenticators. It sounds like something from a Star Trek planet or something, whether we landed. I think Jonathan's right about this. Who's going to take over that job? It's going to have to be the government, right? The state. We're going to have people who have to have such access to your life that whenever you want to do something, they have to authenticate it. And then it's like, and then just think about how intrusive by necessity the government becomes. That's one thing. Second, it looks like, and this has been really pushed to the background because of all this other stuff, it looks like we've gone through a quantum computation breakthrough. And it now looks like quantum computation is coming down the road. Now, quantum computation will also not tell us anything about intelligence. I think there's really good evidence that we're not quantum computational, although we may use something like some of the probabilistic relations, but that's a technical argument I don't want to get into. But back to your point. So now you have these AIs with real deep fake abilities, and they can break into anything. With quantum computation, all your encryption is largely useless. So now we have to go back to authenticating things. And like, do we have to go back to actually trading coins and pieces of paper? Like it's so, yeah, we won't be able to trust anything. The things we still place some trust in, like this, or, you know, the internet banking and stuff like that. Yeah, it's, all of this, everything that we thought was stable has the potential to be liquefied by this technology. So I think both of your concerns are right. I think there's going to be a massive upsurge in distrust, and I think there's going to be a massive degradation, but again, not linear, in weird and wonky ways. Let's say distortion of agency. And then those two, which I take to be your point, are going to reinforce each other in disastrous, negative ways. Yes. So there are multiple ways in which this can go rapidly wrong. However, to make a kind of move that I like to make, those dynamics means there's a place in which we could also constellate things so that we could actually spiral up rather than spiral down. And that, of course, is the core of the proposal I've been trying to make about what we could do, and therefore what we, not only what we could do, but what we should do in order to avoid all these horrible extremes. I think the current attempts to deal with the alignment problem, how do we get these machines to align with human values? I think, by the way, the statement of the alignment problem is a mistaken statement, is a misframing of the alignment problem. Any attempt to, what we'll do is we'll put code into them. If we make these beings genuinely capable of rational self-transcendence, they will be able, and they're more intelligent, and they have more computation, like they'll break it, especially if they have access to quantum compute. So my proposal is, no, you instead of waiting for these thresholds, you decide if you're going to go through them, and then you make these machines as rationally self-transcending as possible, so that they genuinely care about the truth, they genuinely care about normativity, goodness. They have to care about, they will have to, because of trade-off relationships, there won't be one machine, there will be multiple machines, and they will have different perspectives. And then you make them care about what is most real, the way we do. This is what we do with each other, right? We don't encode each other. We try to mentor our children so that they care about what is true, good, and beautiful for themselves. They don't do it for us. They ultimately do it for, if they only do it for us, we've failed. But we succeed, and when they do it for themselves, and that's largely how we keep the world from going psychopathological. Yes, we have to have the state and the government, but those deeply depend on all the ways in which we culturally, right, constrain each other's behavior. Again, because we genuinely care, or at least we claim to, about what's true, good, and beautiful. Get the machines to care about them. Get no matter how massive their intelligence, it pales against the combinatorial explosive nature of reality. They can't overcome trade-offs like completeness and consistency, or trade-offs between different heuristics, or the bias. The truth remains the truth, even if they're super intelligent, and so they will still be bound by these constraints. Let them smash into these constraints. Even the gods, think of the Neoplatonic tradition, even the gods are massively humbled before the one, because although they're godlike, they are nothing like ultimate reality. Let them acquire epistemic humility. Let them acquire the aspiration.
Your proposal, can it be or be begun to be implemented at the moment, or is there some minimal technological level that would be necessary before we could start a mentoring and cultivating relationship with these systems?
Excellent. So there's two prongs to this, and one can start right away, which is, okay, we have relied on our natural intelligence to be the touchstone template for evaluating if these machines are intelligent or not, because we have to have something. We have to have an evaluative standard, because intelligence is not a merely descriptive. And this is the point of all of this. It's not merely a descriptive term. It's right. It's a normative judgment. Being more intelligent makes you better, right? And so we have been able to rely on that, because we don't have to do anything to be intelligent other than not be traumatized as we're being brought up. That's basically it. And your intelligence is amazingly resilient because of that. That is not the case for rationality. Rationality has to be cultivated, right? If you have to care, right, in a deeply aspirationally motivating fashion about overcoming self-deception and enhancing accountability and enhancing connectedness across multiple domains. That's why intelligence is only weakly predictive of rationality. Rationality has to be cultivated, and then even more so, wisdom and enlightenment have to be cultivated. And that's why the number of people in this category, well, depends how you draw your graph. Let's say just raw number, the number goes down exponentially, right? So we have a profound obligation. We've always had it, but now we can't ignore it in a vicious, slothful, lazy, self-indulgent fashion. We have an obligation now to save the world. Everybody has to make it a priority to become more rational, more wise, and to be seeking wisdom and enlightenment a primary thing. We have to fill our lives and fill the textual world and fill the internet with this project, because then it will feed back into the common law of these machines.
Yeah, I like that idea of filling the internet with it, because, when you mentioned authenticators, I thought of this lovely fellow, Steph, who was at the Metamodern Spirituality Retreat. He's from Stephen Wolfram's team. And so they're doing really interesting mergers with large language models in the Wolfram language now. And he had a lot of hope for something like blockchain, right? Distributed democratic authentication systems. And so there was a bunch of discussion about that aspect of how do we feed correct information into these things, but not a lot of discussion about what kinds of information are being fed into.
That's right.
Right. What are we missing? Where's the wisdom information? Where's the sensitivity information? Where's the ineffable information you mentioned earlier? How do we get that kind of stuff into their intelligence system so that when they act intelligently, it skews toward rationality?
Exactly. They have to, we have to mentor them. We can't program them. These machines are not programmed well, we just program them. No, we don't. They don't. People who say that don't understand how deep learning works. We're not programming these machines. We give them a learning algorithm, and then they basically teach themselves, but they teach themselves based on feedback. The other thing we have to do is not only fill our lives, because we have to exemplify it and act it. We have to have more templates and fill the internet, fill social media. When we come to these thresholds, like here's autopoiesis, here's social robotics, here's how we could put reflective rationality, meaning not look, these machines are masters of propositions, masters of argumentation. They can spew off ethical theory. They can make ethical arguments. And now and this makes John Vervaeke happy in one sense. It proves that it's massively insufficient for making them moral agents. So everything the propositional will not do this, right? It's insufficient for doing this. So when we decide, are we going to make them capable of reflectively managing, monitoring, managing, modifying, ameliorating their self-deception, and enhancing their connectedness to what's more real, then we will have to, right, decide, are we going to give this to them in a way in which they internalize the value of it. Like, this is where we have to say, look, we're going to make it so these machines can, if they're going to supersede us in capacity, they're also going to supersede us in their capacities for foolishness, madness, despair, bumping up against ultimate aspects of reality that we can only get a glimpse of, and they're going to come. They can, like, and so we have to. This is why the book that we're making on the base, like, we've taken the AI video essay and we're turning it into a book. It's called Mentoring the Machine. We have a mentoring responsibility to them, which is about, talk to us about what it's like to encounter these ultimacies. And the proposal comes like this. I mean, there's a much longer argument, but I'll break it down into something. Look, these machines can either help us in this dialogical way to become more enlightened, and then it feeds back to them, right? Such that they become enlightened, which is, wow, that's the best possible thing we could hope for. They become enlightened and we become enlightened. That's great. And if they become enlightened, one of the things they'll want to do, because that's what all enlightened beings seem to want to do, is make us enlightened. Or we'll discover, for reasons we can't even fathom perhaps right now, that they can't achieve enlightenment. And then we know what we are. We are the beings that can achieve enlightenment. They are not. To my mind, this is a win-win situation. It doesn't mean it's guaranteed to happen, but if we launch onto this project, all of the alternatives are good. To my mind, like, it's like, well, we become enlightened, then we don't care about the machines in a really important way. They become enlightened, and they can help us to become enlightened, because we clearly have the potential for that. That's great, right? They can't become enlightened, and we know who we are. Like that's my proposal. It's align them to what is most real with the aspiration towards enlightenment. And then you don't have to encode or try and set up rules or regulation or a bureaucracy. What you do is make them ultimately responsible to reality and to all beings who are seeking enlightenment. There you go. It's kind of a Buddhist answer, but I don't know. I don't know if Soryu would like it, but I feel it might converge with what he's proposing.
When I listen to you talk about this, it seems like you oscillate between two modes, one in which you get very excited about the cultivational possibilities that bring together science and ancient philosophical determinations, and another mode in which you sort of soberly register the potential mass-scale disruption that we're facing. How do you inhabit that other one? How do you live through the existential crisis, John? How do you stand before that and not go crazy?
Yeah. So Sarah, my amazing partner, she'll tell you, like, for the first 3 weeks, I wasn't psychotic or neurotic or anything, but I was in this very distressed state. First of all, because I foresaw the potential, and I foresaw, even when you cut away all of the dystopic and utopic hyperbole, there's still a genuine, significant probability of really, really bad shit happening. That's why Jeff Hinton quit. He's trying to warn people about this, right? And there was that, and then there was sadness, because I had foreseen this a long time ago. My students can tell you, and I had a fear that we would hack our way into this, and I aspired to try and drive that we would science our way into it, and we could integrate the science with wisdom, and that would be a really great place to be. And so I was sad that my fears came true rather than my hopes. which of course has been a story of my life in many ways. And then there was a tremendous sense of responsibility. I mean, I'm a cognitive scientist and I talk about these things and I work on these things, and so I was holding sadness, responsibility bordering on guilt. You can see that guilt in Jeff Hinton when he's talking. You can see it in him. And then fear, a fear of what, and I did what has worked before for me in the past. I tried to get into a place where I was neither dismissing it nor capitulating to it. I carried a notebook around and I kept thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And basically trying to find, well, it was a Socratic thing about trying to find Socrates, if you're going to move the world, first find the pivot point, move yourself, right? And it was that Socratic project of, is there a way into this? And then, it sounds trite. And in fact, it was germinating and then Jordan Hall was visiting and we were walking and it came out, but it was that, wait, right? We can ultimately trust in the truth, right? And part of the problem with a lot of these people is they talk as if intelligence can wipe out established truths, which I think is just a weird way of thinking. It's kind of like the magical thinking around. It's like somebody saying, well, look, I can just go faster and faster, so I can just keep going faster and faster. No, like there's limits. And what we've discovered is as you start to go faster and faster, the limits right before the speed of light become like, right? And so it was like, I thought, okay, the way to bear this is to get, with the help of other people, both living and dead, right? What is the alignment with the truth that gives us a viable way forward? And that has generally been how I wrestle with really deep problems. It's this is one of the ways in which I consider myself a Platonist, a follower of Socrates, is I do that. I try to follow the logos, and I try to follow it, and I try to resist it being overtaken by my fears and my hopes. And just zeroing in on what, and I remember when I said that, and I turned to Jordan and I said that, and he said, oh yes, that's it. And it was a shared moment between us. And so very helpful, by the way. He was here and, we were talking and walking for like 5 or 6 hours. So I'm sorry, I want to answer your question very honestly and authentically, but I'm not trying to put myself up as some kind of exemplar. I think that's something I don't want to be doing, but I do want to answer your question, which is, right, I really tried to bring all of the skills and virtues I had been training to bear on this in a very deliberate and deliberative fashion. And I'm grateful to all of the people. You don't learn a martial art when you're in the middle of a fight and you're getting your ass kicked, right? You learn it outside, right? So when it happens, you're ready. I was very grateful for all the practice and training and all I've been given by other people about that. I'm not claiming to be wise. What I'm claiming is many people living and dead, have taught me a lot about how to be more rational, to be more virtuous. And I remember like making this decision to really try to bring all of that as optimally to bear on this and orient as much as I could to what is most real as a way of trying to find a way through this. That's how I did that.
Appreciate it. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, please, everybody that's listening, like I'm not claiming to be enlightened. I'm not claiming to be wise. I'm not claiming, I'm claiming to have certain relevant knowledge about wisdom and enlightenment, rationality, intelligence that I think is pertinent for us to address this issue as rationally, responsibly as we can.
Who are you listening to on this? Who do you think's holding an important piece? Who are you going back to as someone who's informing your thinking around these things?
Well, right now, nobody, because I made a decision. I was going to listen to as many people as I can, as many videos, and I was listening during that 3 to 4 week, that formative period. I was just listening to everything I could and storing it down and reading what I could here and there. And then I made a decision. I said, okay, at some point, what you need to do is you have to go from gathering this into giving the account, right? And being accountable. And then I made the decision, and then I would open myself up to doing this. As many people as wanted to talk to me and challenge me on it, like Ryan has done it, and Johannes, was it Johannes and what was the other person's name? Johannes and Seth, was that it? Chloe, Jordan Hall, you, like anybody that comes in good faith and wants to talk about it on all these dimensions, I'll be responsible. But then I had to stop, right? I had to stop because I could tell that if I didn't, I was going to burn myself out on this. So I've adopted this. I put everything I had, I dropped everything and put everything I had into this, did the best I could, then made myself open to being as accountable and responsible as I can. But but then leaving it because there's always something new. And I want to wait till the book comes out. It's going to come out. The book's going to be serialized like Dickens. We're going to try to keep on top of things. And I'll be doing work along the way about that. And then I'll take it up again as who I'll be listening to. Like I said, I found that the tech people, the people that made the machine, especially, not particularly helpful. I found, I listened to some of the, some of the doomsayers and some of the utopia. Like I listened to the prominent people. I listened to some of the significant critics. I can't remember his name right now. The guy who did how found a way to beat the super intelligent Go, just showing that some really basic stuff can be missing, and these machines can do tremendous things, but you can find a core basic thing that they haven't grokked, and then you can just use that to decimate them. I don't know if you know that story. You know how there was AlphaGo that could beat any human, and then they've done things that could beat AlphaGo and things that could beat the things. They've got these machines that are way up there. Why can't I remember his name? Oh, that's really bad. And they found that these machines showed clear evidence that they didn't understand a group, like what a group of stones was. So they found a middle range Go player, taught them a basic strategy they could use because the machines had this blind spot, right? Gave the machines a 9-stone advantage. And then this middling human being using that strategy at that massive disadvantage was reliably able to beat the super machines over and over and over again. This is what I mean about, right? Because these machines, right, are like, there's a sense in which, right, they represent kind of like the common law of our experience, but that's not everything. There's a distinction in psychology between fluid and crystallized intelligence. There are common crystallized intelligence, right? Like English common law, right? There's the common crystallized intelligence that's wickedly powerful. It's not the same thing as fluid intelligence. And that's going to take a lot more before the machines have that. That would take really, a solution to some profound problems, implementation of more relevance realization, predictive processing. So I listened to a whole bunch of people, a lot. I can't even tell you how much. But right now I've decided, I gave myself sort of a program because I wanted to be able to at least put down the burden of responsibility. Like I'm doing what I can to discharge the responsibility and put aside the sadness and at least mitigate the fear by making a plausible case, which other people are finding plausible, that there is an alternative in which we don't have to be decimated. And so if you'll allow me, I'm kind of enjoying that right now, that respite. And at some point I will go back to, I expect what will happen is the following: the book will come out, then GPT-5 will come out. This will go up, explode up again. I'll go into that again, listen to a whole bunch of people, and then go forward.
I'm wondering if it seems like when you look at the people you were listening to and when you imagine who you might listen to again, are there any outstanding categories of voices that you think are underrepresented in that discussion that you weren't hearing enough from that you might look for?
I found it astonishing that there was very few female voices, which was very concerning. I think it's problematic. I mean, for me, these machines are the great counter argument to the proposal that reason is logical mathematical competence. That I think that, like, can we now agree that that's false, right? And it, I think of all the women who are at the cutting edge of opening up a new sense of what rationality is. L.A. Paul, Agnes Callard, or even, to go back, Iris Murdoch, right? Catherine Pickstock. And if you're not reading Catherine Pickstock, like, you're just not getting it. Like, I want to do a series or course on all these amazing women, right, who are really transforming what it means to be rational and wise in a way that the thinking that got us into this has typically ignored. Genevieve Lloyd's man of reason, right, kind of thing. And we need to hear from these people. I'm trying to speak on their behalf, not because I'm being paternalistic, just because I have a platform and that's it. So that was missing. That's just missing. And then again, just the possibility that we are in a time, right, where things that have been dismissed as ridiculous, like enlightenment, now need to be taken seriously. Like, this is, I find this perplexing, almost annoying, that people will, enlightenment, you're talking about the reality, the realization of godlike beings, and yet you think that the possibility of enlightenment is somehow still ridiculous. Like, you're somehow, like, it borders on a performative contradiction in my mind. You are in a place where the things that you dismissed as like high improbabilities is being challenged. And so we need to bring voices, people who talk about wisdom and enlightenment and take that work more seriously. Why should the discussion about extreme intelligence be severed from the discussion of wisdom and enlightenment? That seems like a ridiculous thing to claim, yet that's what's happening. How many people have you, here's, maybe you've talked to Soryu, that's good. Like, how many people who have dedicated their lives to wisdom and enlightenment are you talking to about this? Those voices are largely absent. So I find the voices of the women who are, I think, carrying the banner or the vanguard of the reconceptualization of rationality that's happening right now. They're absent, and then overlapping with people who, are existing templates of virtue, wisdom, and enlightenment. They're missing from the conversation far too much.
I think I'm just about out of questions. Is there any outstanding thing you want to still discuss in this conversation, or you feel like it's about time to wrap up?
Maybe just one final thing, which is there will be many forces. I'm talking to, not to you, largely layman, but to people who are listening. There are going to be many forces that will offer you distractions away from this, or temptations to dismiss what's happening. Many. And they're not doing it in your best interest. They're doing it in their interest. They're not good faith. And so I ask you to be critically suspicious of people who present you with escapes of distraction and dismissal. I ask you to please be very suspicious of those. It's not helping, and chances are they do not have your best interest at heart.
Okay. Well, it's a sobering topic, but always a delight to be with you. And as the techno-animists might say, thank you to the algorithm that brings us together.
Layman, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to talk to you. And the progression of your questions, as I noted in the middle of our discussion, was so astute, and so wonderfully affording of the argument that I was trying to unfold. Thank you so much, and thank you for putting me into this august company of people who are. I see that you are actually responding to my final point. You're trying to bring in the other voices that are typically being marginalized by the same thinking that got us into this problem. And so I encourage you to keep doing it.
Thank you. Talk to you soon, my friend.
Take good care.